Right. So today was going to look into government corruption.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. Not exactly, light dinner conversation.
Right.
But the sources you sent over are fascinating.
Yeah.
Really get into not just like the who, the kind of people that are involved in corruption, but the environment.
The systems.
Yeah, the systems that kind of breed it.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of like a recipe for trouble, but luckily,
also,
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, a roadmap for solutions.
A roadmap for solutions. I like that.
So you ready to unpack this?
Oh, yeah. Let's do it.
All right. So let's start with the how.
Okay.
Like, we all know the word corruption.
Right.
But your sources break it down into very specific forms.
Yeah.
Like bribery. Like, we think of like...
smoky back rooms?
Yeah, smoky back rooms and suitcases full of cash.
Right.
But one of your sources highlights a case study on construction permits.
Oh, and it turns out that a contractor, greasing the wheels to get a permit approved faster can be just as damaging, even if it's not on like a grand scale.
Right. Yeah, it's a great example of how corruption hides in plain sight.
Yeah.
We tend to think about the big scandals, but these smaller everyday instances can be just as corrosive, eroding public trust and creating an uneven playing field.
Totally. And speaking of uneven playing fields, embezzlement.
Yeah.
Big one.
Huge.
One of your sources, a report from Transparency International, highlighted how funds intended for like a rural healthcare initiative in, I'm not going to try to pronounce the name of the country.
Okay.
But were siphoned off, leaving communities with like substandard facilities.
Right.
So we're not talking about just like
abstract dollar figures.
Yeah, abstract dollar figures. We're talking about real people.
Absolutely. Real people, real lives impacted.
Yeah, impacted.
Yeah.
Okay, this next one hits close to home for a lot of people. Nepotism and cronyism.
Right.
Those situations where someone gets a job or a contract.
Yes.
Not because they're qualified, but because they know the right people. One of your sources, a study on public procurement, found that contracts that were awarded through nepotistic practices were significantly more likely to be overpriced.
Of course.
And poorly executed.
It undermines the whole idea of a meritocracy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, it creates a system where success is determined by connections rather than talent or hard work.
It's like playing a rigged game.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it breeds resentment and cynicism.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's move on to the more overtly coercive forms of corruption, extortion, and influence peddling.
Right.
One of your sources actually had this chilling anecdote about a small business owner.
Oh, wow.
And again, not going to try to pronounce the name of the country.
No worries.
But who was pressured into paying bribes to avoid having their shop shut down by corrupt officials.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, it's scary stuff.
Those examples are stark reminders that corruption isn't just about financial gain.
Yeah.
It's about power and control.
Yeah.
It's about exploiting a position of authority to intimidate and manipulate others for personal benefit.
So we've kind of covered the how, but what about the who? We all have that stereotypical image of like a shady official stuffing wads of cash into their pockets.
That caricature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But your sources challenge that notion, right?
They do. There's no single profile of a corrupt individual. Sure. It's not about age or gender or background.
Right.
It's about specific motivations and mindsets that make someone more susceptible to crossing that ethical line.
So it's not about bad apples as much as it is about
the conditions that make the apples go bad.
Yeah. Okay. So before we get to the systems and the environments, let's dig a little deeper into those individual motivations. Greed, of course, classic one.
Of course.
But one of your sources, a psychological study on corrupt behavior, made this fascinating point that greed isn't always about amassing obscene wealth.
Interesting.
Sometimes it's about the desire for just a little bit more.
Right.
That sense of getting ahead, even if it means bending the rules a little bit.
It's like that saying, the more you have, the more you want.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Exactly.
It can become this insatiable appetite.
Yeah, and that brings us to another key factor.
Okay.
A weak moral compass.
Right. It's not always about blatant disregard for ethics, but rather the ability to rationalize and justify corrupt actions.
Yeah.
One of your sources, a book on the psychology of white-collar crime, had a compelling case study on this.
Okay.
It examined how individuals in positions of power convinced themselves that they weren't really harming anyone despite engaging in clearly unethical behavior.
Right.
It's that slippery slope of self-deception.
Like they create their own
Yes.
moral loophole.
Moral loopholes, exactly.
Yeah, and haven't we all met people with that sense of entitlement?
Oh, yeah.
That belief that the rules simply don't apply to them.
Absolutely.
One of your sources, a report on political corruption, linked this sense of entitlement to a higher likelihood of engaging in corrupt acts.
Of course.
It's like they see themselves as above the law.
Above the law, yeah.
And this is interesting.
Okay.
It may be counterintuitive.
Okay.
The idea that insecurity and low self-esteem can actually contribute to corruption.
Interesting.
Yeah, a study cited in one of your sources found that individuals who felt inadequate or lacked a sense of self-worth were more prone to engaging in corrupt behaviors as a way to gain validation or a sense of power.
So it's almost like a twisted form of compensation, right?
Yeah.
Using corruption to fill void.
Yeah, fascinating stuff.
It's complex interplay of psychological factors.
Right, and while these individual motivations are important, we can't ignore the powerful influence of the environment.
Absolutely.
So that's where the where of corruption comes into play.
Aware.
Yeah. It's not just about bad apples.
Right.
It's about the orchard itself.
Yes.
Sometimes the very systems and structures.
I like that analogy,
Yeah.
the orchard.
That we create actually foster corruption. You know, think of it this way.
Yeah.
If you plant an apple tree in a swamp,
Right.
you can't expect it to bear good fruit.
You're not going to get good apples.
Right.
Yeah.
So are we saying that even well-intentioned individuals can be corrupted by the environment they're in?
That's exactly right. And that's why understanding the where is so crucial.
Right.
It's not just about pointing fingers at individuals. It's about identifying the systemic issues that create fertile ground for corruption to flourish.
All right, so this is where things get really interesting. So tell me more about this where element.
Okay, let's dive into that. Well, imagine like a government agency where decisions are made behind closed doors with little to no public oversight. That's a breeding ground for corruption, right?
Right.
One of your sources. A report on global corruption trends actually calls this a culture of secrecy.
A culture of secrecy. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense.
It does.
Like without transparency.
Yeah.
It's so easy for corrupt practices to
take root.
Yeah, to take root and spread.
And spread. Yeah, absolutely.
It's like trying to grow a plant in a dark room.
Right.
Like it needs sunlight to thrive.
Exactly.
And speaking of sunlight, what about accountability?
Yeah, accountability.
That's got to be a key ingredient in a healthy system.
It's huge.
Yeah.
Absolutely. When there are no consequences for wrongdoing, corruption flourishes.
Yeah.
One of your sources actually used a really interesting analogy.
Okay.
They said, think of it like a playground with no supervision.
Okay.
If the bullies know they can get away with anything, they'll run rampant.
Right.
But if there's a watchful teacher present, they're much less likely to act out, right?
Right.
It's the same principle with government. If there are strong mechanisms for holding officials accountable, things like independent audits, whistleblower protections, robust law enforcement, that creates a deterrent effect.
So it's about creating that teacher on the playground effect.
Yeah.
Like making sure that someone's watching and ready to enforce the rules.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's why a strong rule of law is so vital.
Right.
One of your sources, a study on the relationship between corruption and economic development, found a direct correlation between weak rule of law and high levels of corruption.
Right.
When laws are selectively enforced or the judicial system itself is compromised, it creates a climate of impunity where corruption can thrive.
So it's like the whole system starts to kind of decay from the inside out.
Absolutely.
And it makes you wonder, like, what happens when even seemingly small transgressions are ignored?
Yes.
Does that, like, create a ripple effect?
That's where the broken windows theory comes in. It suggests that even minor offenses, if left unaddressed, can signal that the rules don't matter, emboldening individuals to engage in more serious misconduct.
So it's like that saying, a stitch in time saves 9.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One of your sources, a case study on a local government, illustrated this perfectly. They found that a culture of ignoring minor ethics violations eventually led to a major embezzlement scandal.
Wow. So they didn't sweat the small stuff. And
They did not.
Yeah.
And it came back to bite them.
They came back to bite them in a big way.
Yes.
Okay. This next point is a sensitive one.
Okay.
But your sources don't shy away from it.
Yeah.
Low salaries and poor working conditions.
Right.
For government officials.
Yeah, it's important to understand the context, right?
Right.
If someone is struggling to make ends meet, the temptation to supplement their income through corrupt means can be immense.
Yeah. It's like sometimes corruption isn't born out of pure greed, but out of desperation or a sense of being trapped in a system that doesn't value their work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a tough reality to confront.
It is, and it highlights the importance of not only addressing the individual motivations for corruption, but also the systemic factors that can create an environment that's conducive to it.
Okay, so we talked about lack of transparency, weak accountability, a culture of impunity, and even economic pressures.
Economic pressure.
Yeah. Anything else we should add to this recipe for trouble?
Well, we touched on it before, but it's worth reiterating. Nepotism and cronyism, when positions and contracts are awarded based on connections rather than merit, it not only undermines fairness, but also creates a breeding ground for corruption.
Okay.
One of your sources, a report on corruption in developing countries, argued that nepotism can lead to a shadow state.
A shadow state.
Where loyalty to a particular network trumps any sense of public duty.
It's like that old saying,
What's that?
It's not what you know, it's who you know.
Right.
And when that becomes like the dominant culture,
it
erodes trust.
Of course.
And the entire system.
Absolutely.
Yeah. People start to believe that the game is rigged.
Right.
There's no point in playing by the rules.
Yeah, it's a dangerous path, for sure. It leads to this downward spiral of cynicism and disengagement.
Right.
But here's the good news.
Okay.
Your sources don't just leave us wallowing in despair.
Okay, good.
They actually offer some concrete solutions, some ways to address these systemic issues and fight back against corruption.
Okay, so we've explored the dark side.
Yes.
Now let's shine some light.
How's that do it?
On those potential solutions.
Okay, they offer some really good ones.
Okay, like what are some of the key strategies for
one of
most powerful antidotes? Something we've already touched on. Transparency.
Yeah.
Shining a light on government processes.
Right.
Making information accessible to the public. That's crucial. One of your sources, a study on the impact of open data initiatives, found a strong correlation between government transparency and lower levels of corruption.
So it's about empowering citizens to kind of be the watchdogs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Giving them the tools to hold their leaders accountable.
Yeah, sunlight is the best disinfectant, right?
It is. It is.
And speaking of disinfectants, strong enforcement mechanisms.
Yes, absolutely. You got to have teeth.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just have laws on the books.
Right.
You need to have a system that can investigate, prosecute, and punish those who break them.
Right, and that system has to be
independent.
Independent.
Yes.
Yeah, so one of your sources, a report on anti-corruption strategies,
highlighted the importance of independent anti-corruption agencies.
Yes.
With the power to act without political interference.
Absolutely. That's key.
Right. So there has to be some teeth to it.
There does?
Yeah.
Can't just, have it be a paper tiger.
Right. But what about prevention?
Okay.
Like, can we actually create a culture?
That's a great question.
Where honesty and integrity are like the norm.
Yeah.
Not the exception.
I mean, that's the goal, right?
Yeah.
And one of your sources points to a fascinating program in a Scandinavian country.
Okay.
They actually embedded ethics training into their public school curriculum from a very young age.
Wow.
So they're teaching kids about the importance of fairness, honesty, accountability, not just as these abstract concepts, but as practical tools for navigating life.
Right. Yeah. So it's like planting those seeds of integrity early on.
Yes. And guess what? They saw a significant reduction in corrupt practices as those kids grew up and entered various sectors of society.
That's amazing. Like it actually worked.
It did.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
That's pretty cool. But what about those who are already in positions of power?
Right.
How do we address the existing?
Yeah, the existing culture of corruption, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
But that's where citizen engagement comes in.
Okay.
One of your sources, a case study on a successful anti-corruption movement in South America, emphasized the power of ordinary people demanding change.
Okay.
They organized protests, filed petitions,
Right.
used social media to expose corruption,
Yeah.
and ultimately forced their government to enact reforms.
So it's a reminder that we, the people, have the power.
We do.
To create change.
We absolutely do.
Yeah.
If we're willing to raise our voices and demand better from our leaders.
Yeah, we're not powerless.
We're not.
Yeah. And here's another powerful tool that's often overlooked. Okay.
Campaign finance reform.
Ah, yes, that's a big one.
One of your sources, a report on the influence of money in politics, argued that reducing the role of big money in elections is crucial for curbing corruption.
It makes sense. The less money influencing politics,
right,
the less corruption you're likely to have.
So it's about leveling the playing field.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and ensuring that everyone has an equal voice in the political process.
That's the idea.
And that sounds pretty fundamental to a healthy democracy.
It's essential.
Yeah. Okay, and this one might seem counterintuitive.
All right.
Busting bureaucracy.
Interesting.
One of your sources, a study on the relationship between bureaucratic complexity and corruption, found that convoluted processes and excessive red tape actually create opportunities for corruption.
It's like building a maze with all sorts of hidden corners where shady dealings can take place.
So the idea is that by streamlining systems, making things more efficient and transparent, you're removing those hiding places.
Exactly.
Making it harder for corruption to thrive.
You're taking away the tools of the trade.
Yeah, it's like you're taking away the tools of the trade.
For corrupt officials.
For corrupt officials. I love that.
It's a good way to think about it.
Yeah. But I can't help but wonder, are these solutions really achievable?
Right.
We're talking about some pretty major...
systemic changes.
Yeah.
Changes.
It can feel overwhelming.
It can.
Right? Like trying to turn,
a giant ship around.
Yeah, a giant ship around. But one of your sources, a book on social movements, made a point that I thought was really interesting. They said change happens not all at once, but in ripples.
Okay, I like that.
So even small actions, like demanding transparency from your local government or supporting organizations that are fighting corruption can contribute to like a larger wave of change.
I think that's a really important point. Yeah.
It's easy to get discouraged when you look at the scale of the problem.
Yeah, we're not starting from scratch either.
We're not. There are countless individuals and organizations all around the world working tirelessly to combat corruption.
Yeah. Yeah, and what's so fascinating to me is that a lot of your sources highlight the interconnectedness of these solutions.
Absolutely.
Like, for example, promoting transparency makes it easier to hold officials accountable.
Right.
Strong enforcement mechanisms deter corruption and create a climate where ethical education can flourish.
It's a virtuous cycle.
Yeah. It's like weaving a tapestry.
I like that.
Yeah.
Each thread reinforcing the others.
But let's face it, corruption is a global issue.
It is.
How can we as individuals make a difference on such a large scale?
Well, it starts with awareness, with understanding the problem, which is what we've been doing in this deep dive.
Right.
And then it's about taking action in our own spheres of influence.
Okay, so like what kind of action?
Well, one of your sources, a guide for citizen activists, had a brilliant list of concrete steps you can take. It encouraged people to report instances of corruption, advocate for stronger anti-corruption laws, and support ethical businesses. They even suggested something as simple as starting a conversation about corruption with friends and family just to raise awareness.
So it's about realizing that we're not powerless.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That we all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable society.
And that brings me to one of the sources that really stuck with me. It argued that fighting corruption is ultimately about defending democracy itself.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
And it's true. Corruption erodes trust in institutions.
Yeah.
It undermines the rule of law.
Right.
And creates an uneven playing field where the wealthy and powerful can manipulate the system to their advantage.
It's like a poison that slowly weakens the foundations of a free and fair society.
It is.
But here's the thing.
Yeah.
And I'm going back to that
that ripple effect.
That ripple effect idea.
Yeah.
Even small acts of resistance.
Yes.
Of speaking out against corruption. Of demanding transparency and accountability.
Yeah.
those can have a ripple effect.
They can.
They can inspire others to act.
Absolutely.
To demand better from their leaders.
Yes.
To refuse to accept corruption as the norm.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's where hope lies.
Yeah.
Not in some grand utopian vision,
right,
but in the collective action of individuals, each doing their part to create a more just world.
It's about recognizing that we're not just passive bystanders.
We're not.
We're active participants in shaping the society we want to live in.
Absolutely.
And if I can leave our listeners with one final thought, it would be this. One of your sources, a quote from a renowned anti-corruption activist, said, "The fight against corruption is a marathon, not a sprint."
That's such a powerful image.
Yeah.
It reminds us that this is a long-term struggle, that there will be setbacks and challenges along the way.
Of course.
But it also reminds us that persistence is key.
Right.
If we keep pushing,
Yeah.
keep demanding better, keep shining a light on corruption, we can make a difference.
Well said. And on that note, we will leave you to ponder that challenge.
Yes.
What steps can you take?
However small.
However small.
To contribute to this marathon.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
This was great.
Until next time.
This is DigitView.